ahead and there we go, voila. Great. Let's go ahead and get started today. So I think it's now at the point that we need to move to saying good afternoon, good evening, and good night, depending on where you're joining us from. And it's such a pleasure to see those of you who are joining us here for this event. I know it's been a very exciting week for all of us, almost as busy as actually being in Stockholm itself. And just really wanted to welcome you here today. My name is Kelly Ann Naylor, and I am UNICEF's Director for Water, Sanitation, and Hygiene. And I'm coming you here today from our headquarters office in New York City. So I'll be moderating today's event, which is called Reimagining WASH, Water Security for All. So hopefully you're connected to the right session. And I think what we really wanted to do in today's session was really look at the increased global attention that's been brought to the impact of changes in climate on water, the impact it has on vulnerable communities, and the growing awareness of the technical, social, and political challenges that are brought about when water is scarce, we have too little water, or where we have too much water with flooding. And water security is indeed a very urgent and timely topic on the global agenda. So given the consequences for children, that's why UNICEF, which is of course the United Nations Children's Fund, has identified water security for all as one of our top 4 organizational priorities for the next few years. So to advance this discussion on water security today, we really have an action-packed agenda. It's going to start first with a framing presentation by my colleague Sylvia Gaia, who leads UNICEF's program on water, who will explain the development of the Water Vulnerability Index, its results, and how it was used to inform the development of the Water Security for All initiative. After that, we're going to hear some experiences from 3 countries, how it's really working on the ground in Nigeria, Sudan, and Lebanon, as they advance on the key domains that build water security. And then we'll move to a panel discussion, and we're very fortunate to have representatives today from the Swedish International Development Agency actually joining us from Stockholm in real life, and the International Water Association, as well as a dynamic youth activist. So I will be introducing each of these panel members when we get there. Towards the end of the session, we hope that time will cooperate with us and that we'll have a few minutes for questions and answers. So please, you probably by now know how to use the chat box function on the Pathables link. So please put your comments, your thoughts, your questions, and we'll try to answer them either in writing or with the panel at the end of the session. So let's move on to the first part of our session today, where we will have Sylvia Gaia, UNICEF's Senior Advisor for Water, who will be giving a presentation about the Water Security for All initiative. Sylvia, over to you.
Thank you, Kelly. And it's important to say that this initiative of Water Security for All was launched in this year, in March. And as Kelly said, is one of the top priorities now for the UNICEF agenda, because we understand that, you know, the effects of climate events and the increased levels of water scarcity are really affecting children and their families. So this initiative intends to address the high levels of vulnerability that a huge amount of people are experiencing every day. So if we go to the next slide, please. So to do that, I don't see, yeah, okay, thank you. To do that, UNICEF has developed a water vulnerability index to understand how the water as a resource and a water as a service interact, let's say, in the most negative way. This analysis determined that the amount of people that are living in high and extremely high vulnerable areas, and how many of them are children. The vulnerability is, of course, at its highest level when people carry the double burden of, from one side, living in extreme water scarce areas, and from the other side, also having the lowest service levels in terms of access to at least basic water services. UNICEF analysis showed that globally 1 billion people live in high and extremely high water vulnerability areas, out of which 400 million are children. And we have also produced a map that I will show later to identify where those people are, what we call the hotspots, in order to see where is the priority for action. Let's move to the next slides, please. We have done something really, I would say, new here, which is to overlap the risk of water as a resource with the levels of water services that the population has. And as I said, the vulnerability level is based on the interaction between services, or actually lack of them, and the risks on the water resources that are needed for keeping the service working. We have been using the existing data on water scarcity from WRI, World Resources Institute, that in itself is a composite of 5 parameters, and each of the parameters have been given an equal weight of 5 points. And you can see here the dimensions that are part of these composites are water stress, interannual variability, seasonal variability, groundwater table decline, and drought events. So then we have overlapped these water scarcity levels with the levels of service that are available in those areas, service levels as per GMP definition and data, assigning a total weight of 10 points for the GMP service levels. However, we have added a factor so that the poorer service level the population has, the highest the score is, so that we have the ladder weighted in terms of criticality. You can see the weight assigned here in every of the service levels in the slide, right, from 4 to 1. And we have done this because obviously people living in water scarce areas with less will be less vulnerable if they have higher service of services, or if they don't have any service at all. Maybe we can move now to the next slide. So in this slide, you can see the numbers of high and extremely high water vulnerable children. We said that in total there is almost 400 million out of 1 billion total population affected by this extreme vulnerability. And you see the breakdown by regions. You will see some of the areas that are having the higher number on extreme water vulnerable children, and those areas really require priority action from the whole sector. Next slide, please. So using this sophisticated methodology and crossing it with population density maps that we're constructing using UN population data, we have been able to identify the main hotspots where those most vulnerable people are. And you see here in the screen the map of extreme water vulnerability that shows where the more affected populations are. In those high and extremely high areas, people experience, as I said, the double burden of living in high water scarce areas, but also having the lowest levels of services or not service at all. And that's why they are our priority. And this is because of the deprivation that children and their families experience, and how this affects their capacity of growing healthy and survive, have access to education, get their livelihoods assured, and develop their full potential. And of course, don't experience the need to migrate or be exposed to conflict. So here you have the map, and you can see the most red and orange hotspots. Next slide, please. Achieving water security for all requires a combined effort in 4 main dimensions, as we understand it in UNICEF, or resource areas, that are the ones that are on the left side of the screen on blue, which are, first of all, close the gap to provide sustainable water services to everyone, with particular attention to reaching the most vulnerable, right? There is still an access gap to close, and this is one dimension that is very important. But of course, we need to ensure that those water services are climate resilient, because otherwise they won't be sustainable. The third dimension is about assuring that water scarcity is addressed, precisely because the water services need the water resources available over time. In this dimension, it's very important the connection with the smaller scale livelihoods to assure a positive impact in community resilience, but also to assure that there is an interest developed by the communities to get engaged in water demand management, in water conservation, in water protection, and in the right behaviors that also will prevent the water pollution. The fourth dimension of water security for all is around equitable management of water resources and WASH services to increase social cohesion, political stability, and ultimately peace. On the right side of the screen in green, we have also identified the main strategies to accelerate progress on results at a scale. Of course, there is an important accelerator related with advocating for political commitment and policy change. And this needs, of course, to assure that the WASH priorities are recognized as climate sector priorities. This is to assure that they contribute to the national determined contributions and the national adaptation plans, and to assure that these strategies are aligned and talk to each other. There is another important accelerator, which is around building the capacity at national and subnational level and even municipalities that play a very important role in terms of assuring water security for all, but also accelerating the financing, which is there is need, of course, to increase the financing allocation to work four dimensions that I have mentioned. The third one is around mobilizing businesses, and businesses are the one, and private sector are the ones that can really provide a lot of innovative approaches to really tackle, close the gap in a much more efficient way, provide innovative solutions for climate resilient WASH options, and of course, when it comes to water recycle, water reuse, water treatment. So we also need this accelerator with businesses and private sector. And finally, as you may imagine, activate the young people champions, not only to work on advocacy, but also to really play an important role and an active role in really getting engaged around water conservation, environment, water protection, etc. So these are the presentation from my side on water security for all and the extreme water vulnerability index. And I am handing over now to Kelly again. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Sylvia, for this presentation. I think you've really laid out both the data and evidence side, but also these underlying approaches for the water security for all approach, both the dimensions and the accelerators. So thanks so much for that really clear presentation. So now moving to the next part of our program today, we are so lucky to have representatives from 3 countries who are doing this. They are going to be with us to be able to share their perspectives on these 4 dimensions of the water security for all approach, their success stories and their challenges. So it is such a pleasure to be able to see my friend and very close colleague, the Honorable Minister Suleiman Adamu, who is very well-known Minister of Water Resources in Nigeria, a real sector champion. And Minister, Nigeria has been one of the countries that has been making tremendous progress increasing access and really applying climate resilient water supply approaches. So we are really thrilled to have you here today. And we would love to hear from you on your experience and maybe what advice you have for those of us who are hearing about this and looking at applying it in our countries. Thanks so much, and over to you.
Thank you, Kelly. Good to see you again. Albeit virtually, haven't been able to see physically in a long time. Of course, we've been working very closely with UNICEF for several years, and so we're currently Nigeria We have 70% that have gained access to basic water supply, and that was at 2019. And I believe the figures for 2020 will be a bit higher. We couldn't do the survey because of the COVID lockdown last year, but it's ongoing. Of course, we haven't done much on sanitation. The numbers are still looking low, but as you know, we have put a lot of efforts. First of all, in 2016, we realized that the 50% of the rural population still had no access to water in spite of the intervention under the Millennium Development Goals. And we therefore launched a new national program that we call Partnership for Expanded Water, Sanitation and Hygiene with states and development partners, so that we'll be able to raise those figures towards meeting the Sustainable Development Goals. And of course, rural population are the most vulnerable, so they are the ones that are easily left behind. Of course, we've also streamlined gender issues into this. We have so many other programs like menstrual hygiene and other things that are also related with the campaign WASH. But then also in 2017, we had the president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Muhammadu Buhari, declaring a national emergency on WASH, water, sanitation, and hygiene. And thereafter, he urged all the states, we have a federation and 36 states and the Federal Capital Territory making 37 subnational units. And he now requested that all the states should also key in and do their bits. And I would say close to almost all the states in the federation have now joined the chorus, the declaring state of emergency on WASH. But the declaration means investing more. It's just not a verbal declaration. There are specific actions and these are contained in the WASH action plan that was also launched by the president in November 2018. And so far, we've been working on the basis of that WASH action plan. And even our campaign against open defecation has been subsumed. The WASH program has been subsumed under it. So we are working on that. And for us to be able to appreciate what we're doing, whether we're making progress or not, we now introduce, working with UNICEF, the WASH norm, the National Outcome Routine Mapping, which is an annual event. From there, I quoted the previous statistics of 2019. The idea is for us to always know, to keep track of what we're doing and to be sure whether we're making progress or not. That wasn't done several years before, so sometimes even the numbers were not very reliable. We're working with the National Bureau of Statistics, so it gives it more credibility. And that will be able to determine how far we are going. I think those are the key issues. So far, what's been driving us as far as our efforts to meet the SDG targets are concerned.
Thank you so much, Honorable Minister. And I think it's just been an extraordinary watching kind of the progress that Nigeria has been making over these past years. And I think just the political commitment that you have been able to bring behind the plans that you have is such a model. And to see how that is really laid out across all levels of government, I think is certainly something that is really impressive and has really driven, I think, that commitment. And as you said, that has driven investment. And I know that there are a number of states that really have made substantive contributions with domestic resources to really amplify these approaches locally, both on water and sanitation. So thank you so much for sharing that, and also really to appreciate the efforts on data. And I think you're absolutely, just to say, absolutely right to say that it's so important, and it's been challenging during this time to be able to keep up data collection, but absolutely essential for being able to monitor and report on our progress to make sure we're reaching those that are left behind. So thank you so much for sharing those examples, and we really wish you all the best with the continued implementation of those programs. So thank you for that intervention. And thank you. And now we'll move to another country that is also very much working on the water security for all agenda, which is Sudan. And this is, of course, in Sudan, they have had a long experience with looking at both increasing access to wash, but really addressing water scarcity and looking at how this affects different communities and can be also part of a peace building process between different communities in terms of targeting of the investment. So unfortunately, the Honorable Minister was not able to be with us today, but he's recorded a video. And so just to introduce him, it is the Honorable Minister and Professor Yasir A. Mohammed, the Minister of Irrigation and Water Resources in Sudan. So now over to the video.
My name is Yasir Mohammed. I'm the Minister of Irrigation and Water Resources of Sudan. I would like to talk briefly about addressing water scarcity through water harvesting in Sudan. As you know, Sudan is located in Northeast Africa. It's part of this Sudanian Sahel with a kind of semi-arid climate. The rainfall varies from 600 to 700 millimeters in the southern parts, but decreases to almost zero in the northern part, which is actually part of the Sahara Desert. And if you see the map of Sudan, it's characterized by the Nile River, with the White Nile coming from south, from Lake Victoria, crossing South Sudan to meet the Blue Nile, which is coming from Ethiopia in Khartoum. And they make the River Nile, which travels northward. This is a key characteristics of Sudan map. Outside from this central part where the Nile crosses Sudan, there is thousands of kilometers with no permanent water resources. So the question for us, how can we supply domestic water for those people living like 1,000 or 1,500 kilometers away from the Nile? A key potential source is water harvesting, because in many places even there is no groundwater, or it's very expensive to dig groundwater from very deep levels. So water harvesting has been practiced for a couple of hundreds of years as a potential source to provide domestic water for human and, more importantly, also for livestock, because there is large number of livestock of those nomad people who travel seasonally from south to north. However, the key challenge is that those communities, they have very limited capacity, financial and technical capacity, to develop those water ponds or small dams. So the government contributed to build those water harvesting structures like water ponds, we call it locally hafirs, or small dams. The challenge is that the financial resources of the government is also very limited. Now, if we see access to safe water in Sudan in general, for the whole of Sudan, that more than 30% of the Sudanese people, they don't have access to safe water. So that is why we need to have aggressive or very extensive programs of water harvesting all over Sudan away from the rivers. A challenge which we face in this water harvesting is the sustainability of those structures. I mean, the operation and maintenance, and more specifically, the roles and responsibilities of all stakeholders. What is the role of the federal government? What is the role of the state government? And what is the role of the communities themselves? And we have seen in many cases that those schemes or structures for water harvesting, they failed after few years from the first construction. In that, we are working very hard in Sudan to investigate what could be a more sustainable institutional setup with the required legislations to ensure sustainable operation and maintenance, and hence sustainable provision of the service to the rural communities. And Sudan, after the revolution in late 2018, 2019, early 2019, the Sudanese people, they look to the future with full of optimism that to get support from friends and organizations to try to fill this huge gap of water supply in the country. Thank you very much.
Really want to thank so much Sudan for sharing that video, and I think the Honorable Minister has really laid out this connection between what has very much traditionally been kind of the WASH component, and that we heard from Minister Suleiman's remarks around increasing access to safe and affordable drinking water and making sure that those services are climate resilient, with actually looking at the resource itself. And I think this has been such an important part of our pathway in terms of looking beyond the traditional WASH areas, looking at the linkages with the water resource itself, and how we need to be cooperating between the part of the sector that is working on water resources management to make sure that the investments that we're making in the WASH side of the sector are sustainable and climate resilient. So really, thank you so much to the Minister and his team for sharing this experience, and congratulations to them for the great work that's being done. So now we're going to turn to our final panel member from the country experiences, and we're going to look now at the dimension of water security that looks at water cooperation for peace and stability. And we are so pleased to have with us today Ms. Susie Hoyek, who is the advisor to the Minister of Energy and Water in Lebanon, who's going to talk about how this is working in the context of Lebanon. So, Ms. Susie, thank you so much for being here, and over to you. Let's see, Susie, I think you are on mute. Let's see.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Great.
Then
yes,
thank you.
Thank
you, Kelly.
Sound. Over
yes,
to you.
Thank you. Good evening to all from Lebanon. I'm very glad to be with you as well. Thanks for having me. Allow me to start first of all with a quick introductory note. As you may know, since the onset of the Syria crisis in 2011, Lebanon hosted since then over 1.5 million displaced Syrians, in addition to more than 500,000 Palestinian refugees, making Lebanon the highest per capita refugee hosting country in the world. But Lebanon does not have the means to cater for the needs of these populations. Therefore, the UN agencies, and on top of them, the UNICEF, have always cooperated with the Lebanese governments to cope in times of crises. I will give you a few examples that show how Lebanon's experience with water as a means for peace building and stability. I will give 3 examples. The first example I would like to share with you is related to the impact of the Syria crisis on our country, especially that I accompanied Lebanon's response since the beginning in 2014. The displaced Syrians in Lebanon do not live in formal camps specified by the government. Instead, they live among the Lebanese, either in rented apartments or substandard shelters, or in informal settlements spread throughout the country. This fact makes it more challenging to cater for their basic needs, especially when it comes to water and sanitation. Not only did the government not want to provide to provide specific camp areas in order not to make their stay permanent after the experience we had with the Palestinians, but it also didn't allow for permanent infrastructure within informal settlements specifically, which means that it's not possible to connect informal settlements to public water and wastewater networks. The reason behind this policy was not to deprive Syrians from basic services, but to prevent tensions between them and the hosting communities, because water supply to Lebanese was not sufficient even before the Syrian influx, and the additional population had put too much strain on our infrastructure. So it wasn't fair to deprive the Lebanese of water and to add more pressure on the water utilities, which weren't logistically ready to accommodate large numbers of additional populations. So as the ministry responsible for the water sector, and in order to provide water to the displaced Syrians while reducing tensions, we teamed up with UNICEF since 2014. And we made sure to truck safe water to the informal settlements on one hand, and on the other hand, to rehabilitate water systems and increase water sources in hosting areas to provide better services to the Lebanese and to the Syrians living among them outside informal settlements. Today, we could say that this approach has been very successful in reducing conflicts and promoting stability. And we can say also that we never faced major tensions over water between Lebanese and Syrian populations. Another example, also through our cooperation with UNICEF, it did not only reduce tensions between Lebanese and Syrians, but also succeeded in alleviating conflict between Lebanese of different religious sects, and which in some cases are known to be in confrontation. One good example of several others would be in two poor neighborhoods in Tripoli, known for armed confrontations. UNICEF upgraded both of their water systems and held an awareness-raising campaign, and succeeded in increasing subscriptions, treating both areas in a fair way and showing them that they are not left behind. Such projects allow people to think beyond their basic needs and to grow out of their poverty and pain and seek stability and self-development instead of getting dragged behind political armed confrontations. My last example is happening as we speak, and maybe you are aware. Currently, Lebanon is facing the most dire financial and economic crisis of all times, with severe shortages in fuel and electricity supplies directly affecting supply of water to households and to hospitals. Here again, with the direct intervention of UNICEF and with very close collaboration and coordination with the Ministry of Energy and Water, an emergency response plan is put into effect, supplying fuel to hospitals and to water utilities in order to continue serving more than 4 million inhabitants with water. If we allow severe water cuts under these current tense circumstances that the Lebanese are facing, there will definitely be huge conflicts that might extend to tensions with refugees and displaced populations. On a final note, water is life, and everybody should have the right to access safe water. And because it is an essential element of life, it can easily become a reason for conflict or a source of stability. And we in Lebanon chose peace despite the challenges. Thank you. Over to you, Kelly.
Yeah, thank you so much, Susie. That was really, really informative. And I think, you know, what you've really been able to show us through the experience of Lebanon, I think is we often think of water as a source of conflict, and, you know, certainly as a scarce resource it can be. But I think you've also really shown about how water can be a solution. And I think it's really to hear about the integrated work between finding better levels of service and more cost-efficient solutions for refugees and host communities, the experience that you shared around cooperation towards the intercommunity tensions that were around WASH, and having that become an opportunity for building social cohesion and common solution finding. I think those are really, really interesting, and we can learn so much from that. And I did really want to also highlight this point, as you said, that there is a current crisis, and what we're not talking about are the one crisis, but we're talking about this kind of repeated cycle of crisis. And I did really want to highlight, I think we're hoping to share, to highlight that this is a current area where we're seeking support to be able to make sure that the critical functionality of water continues. So, thank you so much for being here. And we know it's a really pressing time for you. But I think you've just been able to really give voice to both the challenges, but also the solutions and the resilience of the Lebanese people on these issues of water and peace building. So thank you so much for that excellent intervention. Great. So now we're going to move to the second panel. And in this panel, we're going to be with a number of partners and who are going to be kind of giving us some examples of how we can, we can look at this with the accelerators. And I think, as Sylvia talked about, we had the dimensions, where we had the 4 dimensions, but then we also had a number of accelerators that were included: the political commitment and policy, accelerating financing and capacity building, innovations and private sector engagement, as well as bringing in youth perspectives. So these accelerators, and many of you might hear that they sound familiar, they're based on the UN Water SDG 6 Global Acceleration Framework, and they contribute to the SDG 6 action space, which is part of the UN Decade of Action on the Sustainable Development Goals. So I know we're a little bit behind on time, but I think we're still good. So we're going to start first with the donor community, and we're really thrilled to have with us today Cecilia Sharp, who is the Director General at the Swedish International Development Agency. Cecilia, you've worked closely with the water development agenda. You were instrumental even in the conception of SDG 6 as a whole water goal. You were someone who really saw these linkages between WASH, between water scarcity, integrated water resources management, and water cooperation. But now you've moved on and you see a much broader portfolio. So really, from this unique perspective that you have as what I would call a former water insider, and now maybe seeing the sector from kind of outside of the water community in a broader, a broader perspective, can you, share with us kind of your insights on this water security for all approach? And really, from a donor perspective, is this relevant? And how do you see it fitting into the bigger picture? So thank you so much for being here, and over to you.
Thank you, Kelly. I'm really happy to have the opportunity to participate in this event, obviously, and to provide some comments from a donor's perspective of water security and whether it's relevant or not. So maybe it's relevant, yes. So am I ready? No, I think the question you posed, it couldn't be more timely, actually, because I think we can be all in agreement that the world is currently facing a severe crisis situation. So this is obviously manifested through recent escalating conflicts, wildfires, floods and droughts, loss of biodiversity. And this is in addition to increasing poverty numbers. And we are not sparing any corner of the globe nowadays. And indeed, it's also detailed in the recent IPCC report that water security will continue to threaten as water resources increasingly become scarce and variability particularly increase. And this obviously means that poor people will become more vulnerable to hazards, and we know women and children are those most at risk. So talking about crisis, though, we shouldn't obviously only talk about those crises that have been very visible, but we also need to talk about water and sanitation and hygiene, and not only about water resources. So how are they interlinked? We have heard about this a little bit. But I think what we need to remember also is obviously the COVID-19 pandemic has been hitting the globe, which has clearly demonstrated the tremendous relevance of having access to safe water services at home, but also in schools and house facilities. So this, again, I think from a donor perspective, has resurfaced the WASH, or the basic service agenda maybe. So it's schools, education, and WASH together. And I think we need to see that it has been and has resurfaced as important areas for support. And I do hope that we as donors will remember this importance to continue to address basic services and of course WASH in this case. Also in the process when we now start the whole Building Back Greener and Fairer agenda, which we are all embarking on somehow in the global negotiations and discussions. So another perspective, which you alluded to a little bit here, Kelly, already, is obviously that the global situation that we are in right now has re-emphasized the interconnectedness of the 6 targets in SDG 6. And it has showed how interlinked they are and that need to be in an integrated manner. And this was, of course, as you said already, at the core when the global goal was developed. But I'm not sure that we all have embraced that we need to see and work with those interlinkages in our daily work. We cannot neglect looking at this interconnectedness. And this is actually where I see an area where UNICEF has an opportunity to prompt action from partners also outside the WASH sector. You have a strong engagement at country level, which is different from many partners, and you're also strong in UN coordination through the UN Water. And I see this as a pathway and strength for UNICEF to really support the acceleration and act and do action and catalyzing hence results for poor. So I think we must say, and I hope it has been really clear, is clear to everyone that we need to tackle this planetary crisis jointly and that action must happen now. In reality, this means that we need to go beyond our own comfort zone and engage in the broader water security and safety agenda if we want to be relevant and do the right thing in this rapidly changing world. Actions need to reinforce the capacity of whole societies from national level down to local communities to address different types of risks and to build resilience. We need to continue to talk about the resilience inherent capacity of communities. And we need to work from policy to practice. And to make this happen, we need, I think, to more strongly support the capturing and analysis of local data. This is often what is missing. And engage with governments at all levels, including at local level. And this is, of course, one of UNICEF's strengths. But this is of a more general aspects. And we need to plan for the variability. We need to manage water as a resource with all stakeholders. Old concepts has to resurface. All stakeholders together need to manage the resources. And we have to ensure continued poverty reduction, increase health, education, and economic development with all those that need it the most within the watershed. So to end, I must confess that I am especially intrigued today to see that UNICEF WASH agenda and what you do with your partner continues to evolve. You seem to have left working with business as usual and actually have widened your scope and taking steps to reimagining that girls and boys, men and women have services that are sustainable at home in all 3 dimensions, socially, environmentally, and potentially, hopefully, financially as well. And finally, maybe from where I stand, after having left the sector, as you so rightly mentioned, Kelly, about, well, exactly 4 years ago, and then have a little broader scope and agenda looking after, it seems to me that you actually have become a front runner that continues to innovate but also still have the capacity to take action at scale. And this is something you really need to build on. And thank you once again for inviting me to speak in the Reimagining WASH discussion. I think it's a fantastic concept. And I just urge you to continue with the implementation of the Water Security for All framework, which to me look as an excellent concept going forward. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Cecilia. Wow, I think there's so much in there that I think really resonates, and I think just some of the interconnections that you made, yeah, I think it really helps us to think about how we move in this conversation beyond kind of having a conversation inside of the water community to having this kind of global impact. And I really appreciate, I think that in some ways I've been thinking over the course of the Stockholm Water Week that actually the interconnections inside of the sector actually raise the whole value proposition of what water brings to all of these other global development objectives. And so I think when we will deliver better together as the water community, that's going to help deliver on the benefits of both the basic services, but also the biodiversity and the climate action agenda. So I think, as you said, the stakes are really high, but that I think there is this increasing recognition of water, you know, not only as a crisis and a problem, but as a solution for governments to many of these development challenges that are facing. And so thank you so much for kind of helping us to make those linkages. I think it is really very helpful as we go forward. And I think that we can all see the role that we can play in doing that. And so thank you so much for those reflections. Next, moving on, and I think, as we said, we're pleased to have a number of really up and coming young women in WASH professionals with us here today, and so I think our next speaker is going to be Kambiri Cox. And Kambiri, you are the manager of the Member Engagement and Climate Smart Utilities at the International Water Association. And so we know that the solutions are really coming from bringing together all the water users around the table, and that this includes also the private sector. And so we would really appreciate if you could reflect on this water security for all agenda and the opportunities for collaboration with the private sector from your role within the International Water Association. Kambiri, over to you, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Kellyanne, and thank you to your colleagues for inviting IWA to speak today. So as Kellyanne mentioned, I manage the membership engagement at the International Water Association, and I also manage the Climate Smart Utilities program to support water utilities who are keen on transitioning to a more climate resilient future, and basically really ensuring that they have the tools they need for water security for all. So as Sylvia mentioned earlier in the beginning, we're really looking at, for the private sector, we're really looking at closing that gap, right, in an efficient way and finding innovative solutions. And when we think about the private sector, we always think about how they mobilize financing for scaling solutions. We look at how they catalyze action, and most importantly for us, how they generate knowledge and support capacity development in utilities. So with regards to the latter, IWA looks at developing that multi-stakeholder platform that really facilitates collaboration among businesses, WASH service providers, academia, basically bringing everyone to the table, which is a common theme that we see running through most of the sessions here at Stockholm Water Week. So today I want to just give a few examples of how we can have that collaboration, like successful examples of how we have that collaboration in the water sector, and how this can inspire utilities, particularly those in low-income countries, on really getting this private sector involved and bringing them in the discussion for water security for all. So first, I'll look at the development of climate smart tools, right? This is something that we talked about earlier with the private sector really being well positioned to leverage these tools and to ensure that these tools are included in water security actions. So for IWA, we have a collaboration with GIZ and ICRA, which is a Catalan Water Research Institute, for development of a climate resilient tool, a tool for really assessing greenhouse gas emissions and allowing utilities to really assess their performance, determine that baseline for where they're at right now, and really look at the roadmap that they need to follow in order to become climate smart. These we found have allowed utilities to access climate financing for projects so that they can have the funds from global organizations to improve their assets and to develop more resilient infrastructure. The tool, ECAM, is now in over 100 countries, with mostly in, like, I think 50% low-income countries. So we're really seeing uptake of that there. And there's a new version being launched this year that is even more useful for utilities. And then the other example I wanted to look at was the digital transformation. So I mentioned earlier that the private sector is leading the way for the inclusion of these digital tools. And at IWA, we are really trying to showcase this in the best way possible by being the focal point for this digital transformation. So we have a digital transformation hub where we showcase new technologies at technology readiness level 4 to 8, which is pilot to full scale. We showcase the utilities that use these technologies. So we see that those successful public-private partnerships, we see where it works best, and then we see some technologies that work better in low-income countries versus high-income countries. And then we also have examples in the program, including digital payment solutions for unbanked customers to really ensure that we reach all the communities who are usually left behind. So that's what I wanted to cover today. Thank you so much. And I really want to encourage you all to consider that private sector collaboration and bringing them to the table for this multi-stakeholder discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thanks a lot for those really practical examples. And I think it would be great if you can share them. I think we would really like to be able to kind of get in and see how those are working. But I think you've also really brought up, there's been a lot of discussion about engaging the private sector, but I think how we engage them. And I think you've really outlined, around innovations, around knowledge sharing, and the type of collaboration that is attractive for private sector actors, because I think it's a two-way street. If we want private sector to be part of the conversation, we also have to have a conversation that we all want to have together. So that would be really interesting to see those concrete examples. So thank you so much. Great. So now we're moving on to our final panelist. We are really so fortunate today to be able to have with us Nikki Becker from Argentina. And Nikki is the founder of a movement called Youth for Climate in Argentina. And she's also the Sanitation and Water for All Partnership Youth Champion. And Nikki, we know that civil society and the young people are critical stakeholders of the water security for all approach. And we would really love to hear from you about, first of all, really from a youth perspective, why do you think it's important to build a water secure world and a water secure future for young people? And then also, if you could share with us your thoughts on how young people like you want to be engaged with this agenda. So Nikki, the floor is yours, and we really look forward to hearing from you today. Over to you.
Thank you, Kelly, for the question and the invitation to participate in this very relevant event today. First of all, I think it's important to build a water secure world because water is a basic human right. However, more often than not, we take access to water for granted. We tend to naturalize it, but we shouldn't. Yet, lack of access to water disproportionately falls on women and girls who, according to UNICEF, together spend as much as 200 million hours every day collecting these vital resources. Access to basic services such as water supply, sanitation, and hygiene must be a top priority to every government in their national planning and strategies, because we can't forget that water and sanitation are basic elements, fundamental to our life on the planet. As other speakers have also said, COVID-19 has shown how important it is to make universal access to water and sanitation a reality as soon as possible, as while we get there, we need to pay special attention to inequalities in the Global South. It is well-known fact that children are more vulnerable to life-threatening water and food scarcity and waterborne disease brought by climate change. What I would like to emphasize today is that we, the young people, can be more than just passive victims that suffer more from the climate crisis and the inaccessibility to water. We are, and we can be, part of the solution too. Young people have always been and will be on the front lines. Young people have always been willing to give their ideas, their time, and even their life for change. And now we would like to be champions of water conservation. With the youth climate movement, we achieved something that at first appeared impossible, to put the issue on the social and political agenda. Although there is still a long way to go, an unstoppable movement has been created, which is daring enough to imagine a different future, a more just future. But surely the future is threatened by the global climate crisis, which at the same time is strongly linked to water. So as we have been discussing today, we all need to contribute to ensure water security. From a youth perspective at this time, raising ambition in both mitigation and adaptation to climate is vital. First, we need to do something to stop the rise of greenhouse gases concentration. Young people are demanding the conservation of our forests and a just energy transition. But we know that even if we cut all emissions today, the impact of the climate change will still be felt for many, many years. So the burden will fall upon young people and the most vulnerable population who will suffer and have to adapt to new circumstances. So it's top priority that we start making this connection. Climate mitigation and adaptation must start with a smart approach to water and sanitation to guarantee our generation a livable present and future. Let's make sure that solutions are intersectional and equality focused in every decision taken. As young people, we need every single person doing something to build a more environmentally and socially just future. If and only if we are brave enough, we will succeed. But I'm sure we can. So let's start now reimagining the future. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you so much for that. And I think, I think you've really called all of us to action. I think, you have really brought forward this idea that it's not only young people and children who are affected by this, but you have so much to contribute, and that it will require this collective action. And I love that you use the word being brave. And this is something I think a lot about too, that we need to be brave, and we need to challenge ourselves. And, we have to go beyond, our comfort zones, I think, as Cecilia said, and really stretch to be able to reach the scale of ambition, and ultimately build this better future. So thank you so much. And I really, we really look forward to working together with you and really involving young people, and especially right now, we're looking at the lead up to the UN conference on water, which will be taking place place in 2023. So I think it's really up to a lot of us to think about how we can build on this momentum that we have right now to build this broad base of global support. And Nikki, as you said, our individual action, our collective action as countries, and ultimately our global action as humanity. So thank you so much for that. We are just at the 2 p.m. dot here in New York. I'm sure it's every other hour in other places. So I think we're going to need to move towards closing up the session now because we're going to get cut off. But I did want to acknowledge that I think there was a question around how we can support Lebanon in this current crisis, and we will be sharing some additional information about that. There has been a statement by UNICEF's executive director calling attention and action to be able to support Lebanon. And we recently, just an hour ago, launched a movie called Water Under Fire, Voices from the Field, that highlighted the actions of young people in working on bringing water access to Lebanon. So we will try to share those links and resources. I think none of us needs a reminder that the world is in a water crisis and that this is one of the greatest risks to society. But I think what we've come out of today is really seeing that we do have solutions that we can mobilize and accelerate to be able to do this, but we will need to build new alliances. We will need to move out of our comfort zones, and we will need to really join forces to be able to do this together. So thank you so much for your partnership on this journey that we're taking to reimagine WASH and to work on water security for all. We really look forward to continuing our efforts together to make water security a reality for this generation of children and young people and those to come. So thank you so much for your action, for your partnership, and we really wish you all the best as we build this momentum together. Thank you so much and have a great evening and afternoon. And thank you so much to all of our panelists for being here with us today. So thank you very much and have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, bye.